So, what are you waiting for? Follow our social media and our website at sbuisc.com to synchronize with us. The Society for Biological Engineering is a global organization of leading engineers and scientists dedicated to advancing the integration of biology and engineering. This year, SBEUISC aims to foster a professional community that allows stakeholders to creatively thrive in a nurturing environment so that they can utilize their engineering skills in alleviating global issues. Our mission is to promote the integration of biology with engineering and realize its benefits through bioprocessing, biomedical, and biomolecular applications. So, what are the benefits of being a member? Well, by being a member, you'll get first-hand access to IKEA journals and webinars, professional exposure and networking, and effective ideas implementation. For this year's core values, we abbreviated it into ALLIES. It stands for accountability, leadership, liaison, impact, empathy, and synergy. We have two themes for this year. They are pharmaceutical science and food technology, and we aim to give our members the greatest benefit possible. With fresh ideas and various innovations, we are ready to begin a new adventure with you towards a synchronized growth. So, what are you waiting for? Follow our social media and our website at sbuisc.com to synchronize with us.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us and welcome to the International Guest Lecture. My name is BC Grislin from SBEUISC, and I will be the moderator for this event. As we can see, the world is experiencing extraordinary misfortune because of the pandemic. This is especially harder for impoverished people, since many find it difficult to have 3 meals a day and with adequate nutrition. We also have been producing food in an unsustainable way. This might cause a food crisis in the future because of the demand for food will get higher and higher. That being said, sustainable food security is an important issue for us now and in the future. Through this webinar, we want to know if producing and consuming plant-based alternatives is a way to achieve both food sustainability and food security or not. Because it's not only humans today who need help, but also the environment that is getting damaged and therefore the people in future generations. We will dive deeper into this topic soon, but first, let me read the rules that apply during this event. The first one is participants are requested not to unmute themselves during the webinar. The microphone function will only be activated to the speakers, moderators, and responders in the Q&A session. Participants will write questions on the link provided during the presentation session and will be read by the moderator during the question and answer session. Participants are requested not to do screen recording and/or do screen sharing during the seminar. E-certificate will be given to participants who will fill the link that will be displayed at the end of the seminar. To your attention, I will also remind you that this event will be fully conducted in English, and the Q&A session will also be in English as well. You can also scan the Q&A link below in the barcode, and also the link will be sent to you in the chat box. Now, I will invite Kak Afina Zamara, the president of SBEYSC, to give a welcome speech. Kak Afina, the time is yours.
Thank you for the introduction, Macy. Hello, everyone. My name is Afina Zamara, as the president of Society for Biological Engineering in University of Indonesia Student Chapter, or most commonly known as SBEYSC. I would like to say welcome to the speakers today, Ms. Mondwe Shileshe as Food Security, Nutrition, and Agriculture Senior Manager at Global Citizen, and Mr. Kurnia Ramadan, Assistant Professor at Department of Food Technology at Universitas Bakri. And dear attendees, good afternoon and welcome to the main event of International Guest Lecture that's held by SBEYSC regarding plant-based alternatives for sustainable food security. This is the first year that we as an organization have been given the opportunity to expand our reach even bigger and to hold international events, which 2 years ago was only a pipe dream. Indonesia nowadays has strong economic growth and poverty reduction, but the levels of food insecurity and poor nutrition are still high. Agriculture is an important pillar of the Indonesian economy and employs nearly a third of Indonesians, but farmers struggle with poor infrastructures and low incomes. Climate change is projected to lower agriculture productivity. So encompassing all of that, class disparities and climate change, it makes food insecurity a complex problem. It is also a global problem, just as climate change and pandemic affects us all. Therefore, it is important to have a discussion regarding a multi-sectoral approach to food security. And I hope by attending this event, all of the participants can gain insight on how to do our part regarding food security. We sincerely thank our amazing speakers today for their presence, even on the weekends, and it is our absolute pleasure to be a part of this journey. I would like to extend the warmest gratitude to the professional events team of SBEYSC for planning this event. That marks the end of my welcoming speech from me, Afina Zamara, as the president of SBEYSC. Thank you, everyone. Back to you, Macy.
Thank you, Kak Afina, for the opening speech. Now, before we start the lecture session, let me introduce our speakers for today's webinar. For the first speaker, we have Ms. Monde Shileshe. She is currently the Senior Manager for Food Security, Nutrition, and Agriculture at Global Citizen, an international advocacy and campaign organization. She is a seasoned advocate for issues relating to poverty reduction, public health, food security, and nutrition, and a Global Health Corps alumna. She has worked on food security and nutrition in a variety of capacities, including leading the Zambia Civil Society Scaling Up Nutrition Alliance and as a global associate at 1,000 Days in Washington, D.C. For the second speaker, we also have Dr. Kurnia Ramadan as the assistant professor at Bakri University. He is also currently serving as Vice Chair of Jakarta Regional Branch Committee for Indonesian Association of Food Technologists, as known as Perhimpunan Ahli Teknologi Pangan Indonesia. He has been actively involved in several food science-related international journals as editor and also reviewer. Without further ado, I would like to welcome our first speaker, Ms. Monde Shileshe, to deliver the presentation. To Ms. Shileshe, the time is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me here today. I think it's really encouraging to be able to see people come out on a Saturday and have this great conversation. As introduced, my name is Mondwe Shileshe, and I work for an organization called Global Citizen. Just very briefly, I wanted to be able to share with you a presentation that I'd prepared, and the presentation is going to really take three main parts. So the first part is going to talk to you about the current state of food insecurity in the world, and it's really going to show you what the numbers are looking like and what the picture is. And then there's also going to be a piece that relates to how food systems overall are having an impact on our environment. And a really key part about this is sort of the diets that are being shaped, that are shaping our food system. And then the last part, I'll walk through sort of what are some of the solutions that exist for us to be able to tackle this problem. So let me just share my screen. Please give me a signal, moderator, when you're able to see my screen.
Sure. Okay, I can see it now, Ms. Shileshe.
All right, perfect. So as I was saying, for people that are not familiar with Global Citizen, we're really a global movement of young people around the world. So also really exciting for seeing sort of the people that are on this webinar, that if you haven't heard about Global Citizen, what we do is combine pop culture and policy. So getting some of the world's biggest stars and creating festivals and stages where we can then speak about the issues we're speaking about today. Because normally when people see Beyonce on stage, they're more likely to pay attention, and you capture the attention to a point where you're then able to tell them about sort of the global problems that are happening. So that's a very quick background, and this is some of the events that have happened in the past year that you see on my screen. So to kick off the presentation, like I said, the state of food insecurity in the world today. We know that there's 45 million people right now across 43 countries who are on the brink of starvation. This also means that they're facing famine. This is a very specific classification of people who are now in an acute state where they cannot access food. And the result of famine is usually a really high cost in lives. At the start of this year, this number was at 42 million. And in just a number of months, we've seen this number rise by 3 million more people who are facing famine. The second big number is that between 720 and 811 million people in the world faced hunger in 2020. This is a somewhat different number from people who are facing famine, but people who are not able to access a meal every time they go to bed. So this is going to bed hungry. Although not in an acute state, this is quite a significant number in terms of when we look at the people who are experiencing hunger. So that's 118 million more people that were facing hunger in just 2020 than in 2029. And then beyond hunger, there's 1 in 3 people who do not have access to adequate food in 2020. So healthy diets were out of reach for 3 billion people. And this seems like a really big number when you compare across some of the numbers I've given, but this is for everybody that even though you're able to access a meal, you're not accessing a meal that is nutritious or healthy enough for your diet. And what this means is that it has an impact on sort of health outcomes, but also a larger and wider implication on not just undernutrition, but overweight and obesity as well. So even though you might be taking sort of a caloric intake, you're not able to access a very nutritious diet. And that's what that number at the bottom there signifies. This is just a snapshot of a picture of how the trends, the number of undernourished people in the world continued to rise in 2020. And this is in reference to the 720 to the 811 million people in the world who faced hunger. So the estimation is within a range also because of the collection of data. At the very end of my presentation, I will give a list of where you can find some of these resources to be able to see where the numbers change, to be able to see this data a little bit more. So what are the links to nutrition? We know that the world is off track to meet 6 out of the global maternal and infant and young child nutrition targets. So those are targets like wasting, stunting, low birth weight, anemia, and childhood overweight. So stunting is particularly crucial because it has got long-term effects for children. It's chronic malnutrition. So if a child is stunted, and this usually happens within the first 1,000 days of life, this has an impact on their brain development. not only is it just an issue of malnutrition, it's also sort of lost potential over a lifetime because of the kind of damage it does to cognitive development. And a lot of this that I'm presenting right now, even though it might seem a little bit different from what we're talking about, is really related to diets. And so we know that we're now also off track on diet-related and communicable disease targets. So salt intake, raised blood pressure, adult obesity and diabetes. This is also stuff that we're seeing that we're not meeting the targets that the world had set. So around the world, there's 149 million children under the age of 5 who are stunted, which is the key indicator that I talked about. And then you see all of these other big numbers around some of the indicators that I'm just from speaking about. This shows you sort of a picture of what I was talking about in terms of the targets across childhood stunting, childhood overweight, anemia, breastfeeding, and low birth weight, and childhood wasting. These are very key indicators in being able to show us that we are really off course in being able to meet any of these as the world. And in large part, it's currently because of how our food system is shaped. So what you see now is that poor diets are now responsible for a quarter of all deaths. That's a 15% rise since 2010. This is particularly key for our discussion today because a lot of what we are saying in terms of a shift to plant-based alternatives is a result of what are we saying should constitute this primary diet that's able to sustain our environment, but also able to sustain human life. A really good report is this global nutrition report, which was just released actually just a few weeks ago. So make sure to look at that. So the impact of food systems on the environment. I think as I've been speaking and you've sort of seen the numbers of what it looks like. Hunger is increasing, so many children affected, so many individuals. But we know that diets are also not getting healthier and they're making increasing demands on the environment. While at the same time, there's unacceptable levels of malnutrition. So a really key statistic that came out of the report that I just mentioned is that global food demand is now creating more than a third of all greenhouse gas emissions, so around 35%. And this is around the way that we farm our food, So big agriculture, livestock production, the imprint of that in terms of greenhouse gases, we see that significantly increasing. But also the way that it's transported, stored, and processed is also contributing to the greenhouse gas emissions that we are seeing. So the high human, environmental, and economic costs in terms of our current trajectory are really significant. And if no action is taken around how we think about the food that we eat and our diets, we're going to see this impact carrying over a number of years. And so I want to just really show a very specific line. And this, sorry, I think I skipped over a slide. This particular one is just to show you sort of what the picture looks like in terms of the things that people are consuming. So fruit and vegetable intake is still 50% below what is recommended of 5 servings per day. And yet we see that red and processed meat intake is on the rise and almost 5 times the maximum of one serving per week. So we're seeing that, especially in particular pockets around the world, that the consumption of red and processed meat intake is on the rise, and yet the access to fruit and vegetables is low. Quite a number of driving factors. One of the things is that even if you're in a low income place, or even in a sort of a Western world or a developed country, it will always be cheaper to buy soda or to buy sort of processed meat than it is now to buy fruits or a much healthier diet. So in terms of the kind of the pricing of these things as well, it makes it difficult for people to access. So moving towards solutions. Apologies for that typo there, but the first bit is this conversation today is around plant-based alternatives, but it's also about thinking about what is individual action. But in my presentation and building this all out in my work at Global Citizen, what we know is that individual action needs to be matched by a wider shift in the world. So even as individuals move the patterns of eating, this needs to be paired with sort of a coalition of partners across all sectors to ensure good food for all. This good food for all that I've highlighted here is a really key piece that I want to speak about a little bit more. There is a sort of a consensus of organizations across the world who are working on something called the SDG2 Hub, who sat down and thought about what does it mean to have good food? And I'll speak a little bit more about that in just a minute. And then the second thing that we need to see is a transformation of the food system to be responsive to the most vulnerable. The reason this is important is we know that some of the people who are at the front line of the food system, which is smallholder farmers and rural people, they're usually the people who are living in poverty, but also the people who do not have access to nutritious diets because they have to sell off everything that they make. And transforming our food system to think about the people who are most vulnerable in the way it's currently structured will be very helpful, because then you have a wider effect about thinking of the whole system. And this is really key because it moves beyond just what people are eating to what people are producing. And the shift around being able to create some changes across the food systems that are responsive to sort of the environment, do not worsen the situation that we're already in, but then is also able to respond to ensuring that communities have food security. It really means that we need an overhaul of the current system. In the last few months, there have been a number of global events happening, and the Food System Summit was one of them where a lot of this discussion happened. If you hadn't followed this, I think I would advise you to really look up the Food System Summit and see what came out of that, because it's a good way to see the conversation in a wider perspective of, as one shift happens, we need a larger shift in the world. So now I want to speak about good food that I just talked about. So the consensus that a lot of people sat down and they said, okay, we see that the food around us, there's clearly something that needs to change. And perhaps it's changing the way that we think about food. So a lot of people think about food when it's on their plate. But how do we think about it from the perspective of a wider narrative? And so make sure to, and I keep mentioning resource because I think it's pretty helpful for when you're alone to be able to go back and look at these sites that have all of this information. So the SDG2 Advocacy Hub is one where you find all of this information on Good Food for All. But I just really wanted to highlight sort of these key thematic areas that the group of people had highlighted. And so the first is that good food begins with farmers, like I've talked about. So if we're able to think about food from farm to fork, I think we'll be able to think about the shifts that need to happen from not just the choices that we are making, but also the choices that are happening. And for a lot of farmers, like I've said, they're usually the people who are most vulnerable and do not have access to the right kind of nutrition themselves. Also, we do know that food begins with a lot of big agriculture. And this mass production is also what's causing a problem in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. How do we make the shifts in those spaces? How do we encourage a lot more smallholder farmers in a way that's still sustainable for the environment? The second piece is that good food is nutritious, which is something that we've talked about, I think, over and over in this presentation, that it's not just about consuming food, that there needs to be nutrition from the food that you take. The third is good food saves lives. This is particularly key given the kind of situation that we are in the world, where we know that there's a famine, that people are close to famine in a lot of places. There's a hunger crisis. I think Madagascar is one example of where they've had a drought for the last 3 years. And now we see sort of thousands of people who are and this brings me to my point, and good food is vulnerable to disruption. Whereas we speak about the environment and all of these other spaces, we also know that a lot of the time, people experience hunger because of conflict, because of major disasters. And that's a massive driver of people not being able to access good food. Another key point is good food is not always a choice. So like I had earlier alluded to in my presentation, even when people do want to access whether it's plant-based alternatives or diets that have less meat or processed foods or high sugar diets, unfortunately, for a lot of the communities, it's much more expensive to be able to do that. And so this means that we need to challenge this idea of why is it more expensive to access a healthier diet? Why is it more expensive to access good food? And so thinking about this thing of food is not always a choice is really critical to how we're going to be able to shape the future. Good food powers people and economies. I think that's really self-explanatory. And then good food makes progress as well. But lastly, I think it's also about making an association that good food is about love. And I think at the core of what most people do is really, do you love the taste? But food is also the way that people show love. And being able to tell people that this shift in change is not just about a conversation that we are having now. It's about the fact that we need to show love to our future generation to be able to spare the world from really going down this path which we have seen that climate change is causing. So those are kind of just some of the key points I want to share about good food. And I hope like maybe 2 or 3 of those stick for you. I'm now at the end of my presentation, but some key resources to look at is the SOFI report, and this is called the State of Food Insecurity in the World. It usually comes out around July, and this gives a full picture of what's happening. So the numbers I presented earlier around the 720 to 811 million people who go to bed hungry every day, you'll find that kind of information in there. The Global Nutrition Report is another one where you'll be able to find very nutrition-specific information, but also as it relates to diets. This one was released just a few weeks ago and is normally released at the end of the year. Last bit is the Global Hunger Index, which shows a sort of a ranking of what's going on in terms of hunger numbers across the world. And then of course, there's other key sites like the World Food Programme, the International Fund for Agricultural Development like IFAD, UNICEF, where you can find some of the key data points and information. But my presentation today and sort of the picture I've given you is really based off of the experience that I have and which is around advocacy and campaigning. So it's being able to apply the lens of, we know that this is the problem, these are the shifts that need to happen, but thinking about what is some of the individual action that we can take. How can we push some governments? How can we push international communities, local communities to be able to make these changes? And you can find a lot of those resources on globalcitizen.org, which is the organization I work for, to be able to see how you can take action as an individual, but also how you can influence action in the communities that you live in. Thank you very much. Maisie, back to you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Chileche, for the informative and also interesting talk. I would like to recap a little bit from Ms. Chileche's material today. We saw about the concerning numbers regarding food insecurity in the world, especially also the stunting in children. And also we saw that poor diet and nutrition contribute to people's death. Therefore, this food system must end in an instance. And also as an individual, we need to shift and change our food system into good food. And I noticed a few of the points earlier that good food come from farmers and that is nutritious, and a good food also saves lives. Okay, now without more delay, I would like to welcome our second speaker, Mr. Kurnia Ramadan, to begin the presentation. So Mr. Ramadan, the time is yours.
Thank you, Macy. Thank you, SPE, for inviting me to today's event. So I think I will deliver the speech, somehow I can say a lecture in more academical approach, since I'm my profession is academia, so I used to present this topic in more an academical approach. So our topic today is about the plant-based alternative for sustainable food security. I'll begin with the concept of sustainability in food system. I use this image, tempe, as a illustration for this opening slides to describe that we already have our local resources as a distinguished plant-based, what so-called as plant-based foods. So the sustainability in food system, we need to understand that it involves the three main areas. As a whole food supply chain. It involves the society, of course. As a consumers, the health, the well-being of consumers, and society in general. And also the foods is developed from businesses. We know that the most survive business sector during the pandemic is food sector. So it's quite critical and has been part of the human civilization. And the last one, but not least, is the environment itself, because what we grow is we took it from the environment. We harvest it from the environment, so it is most likely directly affect our food system. So we need to be aware. We need to pay attention to these three main areas of the food of the sustainability in food system. With more topic about the sustainability, if we look at one of the composition affecting the sustainability of conditions, we know that the agriculture sector, which is supply for our foods, forestry and other land use, contribute to about 24% to the sustainability issues. And within the agriculture, the meat production seems to be have a large proportion in this what's so-called crisis or the worsening of our climates and our environment. So it is the narration about the animal source foods, the meats and so on is always often we see as the cause of the sustainability issues within the food sectors. So this related to the crisis, and people become more aware about the sustainability issues, and as the meat production is the main contributor in terms of the greenhouse gas emission. So this graph describe the greenhouse gas emission, contribute from the agriculture sector. And from that point of view, there is a campaign or a movement, to promote the shift from the animal source foods, from the meats and other animal products into more alternative protein food sources, which are considered as more sustainable. As we can see, this map, I took it from FAO. I think you can see, the orange color refer to the cattle production, the beef production seems to be dominant, within the Western world, North America and South America. And then some others are from pigs production and some others from buffalo. But these numbers is very general. I like to invite you to criticize this illustration as well, because we cannot accept it as it is without considering the other factors such as the population of each countries, and then which one is the developed country and developing and underdeveloped countries. because this number consists of multiple factors. Yeah, let's say East and Southeast Asia. There is China, there is Japan, Korea, Indonesia also there. So the number seems to be not really representative, yeah, to the condition of whole regions. And this very high number, Latin America and Caribbean, seems to be more contributed by Brazil. As we know, Brazil is one of the biggest, yeah, producer, exporter of agricultural products, and also including the animal products. Yeah, so we need to carefully interpret this number as well. Yeah. However, from that point of view, the high greenhouse gas emission from the animal sectors, people are looking for to the alternative sources. So the plant-based means we are switching, or we are shifting the protein source that we used to consume. Yeah, I group into four general categories. So the first one is plant-based, which is one of our main topic today, and also there are edible insects as well. The research and within this topic is quite popular nowadays in the last few years. Microbioprotein as well. It comes from the microbes, from the fungus and other single cell organisms. Yeah, but sometimes these microbial proteins are also categorized as plant-based. Yeah, since many technology rely on this microbial application, and also the cultured meat. Yeah, as we have been getting the news here, about the information about the cultured meat, the people try to produce meat in a more cleaner way, less gas emission. So they use stem cell technology to develop to produce the meat itself. Yeah. So these are example of innovations in providing alternative protein sources. Yeah, that has been promoted over the last few years, I think. However, the trends on plant-based and the movement itself, we cannot deny that there are debates over this topic, because the question is it the answer? Yeah, you're questioning the topic of today's event. Is it the answer? Is it a universal solution for all people throughout the world? I take some example from a paper, yeah, this published last year about food security, yeah, entitled "Animal Source Foods: Sustainability Problem or Malnutrition and Sustainability Solution." Yeah, respective matters. One thing I point out, what is interesting from this paper is this illustration, yeah, describe that the number of meat consumption per capita, yeah, which is dominated mostly by developed country, yeah, has somehow indirect correlation with the low number of stunting for children. So I think the authors of this paper also mentioned that although this is not direct relation, but it has some relationship between these two factors that cannot be denied. So one idea that I personally also prefer, that the shift is not a universal for all, but it can help at some point for some group of people. Yeah, it's not applicable for all group of people throughout the world. Quoting what is mentioned in this paper, sustainable intensification of livestock production, which involve improved resource use efficiency with environmental stewardship, can foster a reduction of greenhouse gas emission. So it's like an optimist sentence, about how livestock production can also be sustainable while meeting this growing global demand for livestock products, which is expected to increase by 70% by 2050. And also, if we look at the SDG, Sustainable Development Goals, the food security is highly related to these 2 points. Of course, the second agenda of SDG is zero hunger. And also there is another one is responsible consumption production, which is related to the sustainable agri-food sector. So in this fulfilling the food security, we need these 4 factors. Everyone must have access to food, stability of foods. They can utilize the food, and also availability. These all factors must be fulfilled to fulfill the food security concept, condition. But also, the relationship with the environmental, it's also, we need to apply. One proposal is to apply the circular agro-food system. You might have heard about the circular economic, which is using the waste material or side products materials to also being utilized, in order to reduce the waste. It is also applied in food sector. So like in relation to the greenhouse gas emission, usually it is addressing the manure of the livestock, the live animals. As we know, the manures, the what we call it, the cause of the greenhouse gas can be turned into other useful products such as fertilizer and so on. This is just the example of agri-food system. I suggest you to find out more about the circular agri-food system. You can visit these sources, from Wageningen. They're quite advanced in the agriculture related topics. So I'll continue with the plant-based. So in this case, plant-based just as one of the several solutions. It's not a single option. It is like multiple options we can look into. So historically, the plant-based technology was introduced by Dr. Campbell in 1980s. And focusing on the health benefits. But far before that, the practice of vegetarianism or veganism has been recorded throughout the human history. Driven by belief and cultural aspect. But this later on, at the 20th century and today, it is more driven about the health benefits, and also the sustainability aspect. It is gaining popularity in recent decades with the rise of public awareness on sustainability issue. We have to recognize that the plant-based alternatives has been present in Asia as an alternative to meats and dairy. It is widely found in Asian culture, Asian traditional culinary. As we know, like soy milk, has been consumed for centuries as an alternative for cow's milk or goat's milk, and tofu, and some other legumes or peanuts, and the tempeh, and so this one, the seitan, the one derived from wheat, the gluten. From gluten, it has been consumed for centuries, by our ancestors, and basically the most clear thing about it is a cheaper, it's a low cost option, to mimic the meat properties. Fast forward to the modern era, 20th century, there are some early innovation of plant-based protein foods, but The term plant-based it was not used at that year. Yeah, we know there has been and still today the texturized vegetable protein. Yeah, started around 1960s. I think if you used to consume the instant noodle, yeah, there's some like bakso like shape, yeah, or like dried meats. It is usually made from this stuff, yeah, the texturized vegetable protein. It is made from defatted soybean flour or the protein concentrate of soybean, yeah, and then processed by hot extrusion. So it can mimic the texture and appearance of ground meat. Yeah, it's like this. So it's generally the illustration of how to do the extrusion from the soybean protein concentrate into the texturized vegetable protein. Another one is I think not as popular as the previous one, but it is presents mainly in Europe and America. It is called mycoprotein. Yeah, it is was introduced within the same years as a TVP, but it is more local. Yeah, I mean not as widely introduced as the TVP. So it is actually from fungus. Yeah, Fusarium venenatum as a main ingredients. It is cultured in the fermentation tank, yeah, in aerobic condition. So they have oxygen supply with glucose as the substrate, yeah, to culture this fungus. It can be created into a wide range of meat product likes, yeah. So some variant are vegetarian and some variant are vegans, such as the mince, yeah. It doesn't have it doesn't contain meat at all, so it's from these fungus, and also the other ingredients such as starch, and for the one with a vegetarian, sometimes using egg white as well. Yeah. I wonder if any of you have tried this kind of products. So you might find it. I think it's quite limited available in Indonesia. And then we move to the recent innovation on plant-based protein foods, particularly the meat analogs. Yeah, meat analogs. The previous two products, what I have explained, it is more about the texture and the appearance. So there is some limitation on their flavor and mouthfeel attributes. Consumers tend to differentiate, oh, it's not real meat. Yeah. But when it comes to the recent innovations pioneered by these two companies in America, I think, Beyond Meat and Impossible Meat, the one Beyond Meat is, if you know the plant-based Cooper of Burger King, they are the producer. But Impossible Burger, they create their own selling channel. Yeah. So if we look at their ingredients, yeah. So the main ingredients are the protein isolates and the protein concentrates. So it is kind of concentrated protein from the plants. Yeah. The one is from peas and the one is from soybean. And I want to highlight another ingredients, which is the annatto, what they use in Beyond Burger. Annatto is just like plant-based pigments. But then in Impossible Burger is quite interesting. They use the soy lake hemoglobin. Yeah. This is the one major factor, I think. Yeah, major factor that create a real meat sensation to this product. Yeah. Although I haven't tried this product as well, but I think, yeah, from the science approach, yeah, they use this soy lake hemoglobin. I will explain in the next slide. So this is basically for those who are not familiar with the soy protein concentrate. It actually comes from soybean when they have been extracted for its oil. Yeah. So in the Western countries, they utilize soybean for oils. Yeah. But in Asia, we used to extract this into soy milk or even further into tofu or sometimes for tempeh. Yeah. But in the Western world, they use soybean oil for oil extraction, and it has the side products. You add soybean flakes, and then they can be purified into concentrates or isolate products. The principle is the same for the other peas or the other legumes. Yeah, the principle is the same like this. And this is the one in Impossible Burger. Yeah, they create the soy hemoglobin. So the background is how we can get a real taste of meat, yeah, from the plants, yeah. The texture and appearance have been achieved, yeah, long time ago, but the flavor is like a big question. So if we look at the effect of this compound, yeah, myoglobin or hemoglobin within the meat, yeah, it has effect on its color, and also it does have effects on its flavor. Yeah, when we cook the meat, this stuff will react with other components and then creating special flavor of the meat. Yeah, so the researcher tried to find the similar compounds from plants, so they find it from the I think the legumes, yeah, roots, and then they isolate it. Yeah, so this is the chemical structure, and then after the isolation, they use the bacteria modification, yeah, the bioengineering process to produce a higher amount of these compounds, and then continue to extraction, and then they apply it into products. So this is basically the novel things about the recent innovation on meat analogs. Regarding the nutritional quality of plant-based foods, there are debates over it as well. If you try to Google this topic, there are many sites of belief. I mean, like, you know, in food stuff, yeah, we do have many beliefs, yeah, like of veganism, vegetarianism, the whole foods, unprocessed foods ism, yeah, and also tends to glorify some foods and then tends to blame the other foods. It is quite found throughout the world. So I want you to be critical on this point of view and try to use the scientific evidence in terms of the plant-based foods. Yeah, bioavailability is quite the issue. We have been taught that the animal-based products have high quality of protein and high bioavailability. It means the amount of nutrition that is absorbed from milk and from meats is better. Yeah, our body absorb better what is come from meat and from milk rather than from plants. Yeah, so another approach, another study, the other study also been reported that plant proteins or plant-based foods can also do the same as, but there are some conditions, like you need to diversify the source of plants. We cannot rely on a single plant sources. I think this is the last slide from my presentation. In terms of our local resources, we need to look at we have actually many potential resources that not really being utilized. So I asked you, as many of your students, yeah, university students, if it can do activities in research, yeah. So there are a wide range of underutilized resources, yeah, such as side products, yeah, are really potential to be utilized. And one tools that we can elaborate is using some fermentation. Yeah, because fermentation is quite powerful in modification many properties of those resources. Yeah, such as increasing functionality and improving nutritional quality. And what I put as the illustration here is okara. If you know okara, it is we used to call it as ampas tahu. Yeah, the side products from tofu production. It is usually wasted or sometimes feed to the animal, yeah, for livestock feed. But it is also can be processed into such as this traditional tempe gembus, yeah. So we make tempe from this okara, and I think it has potentiality to be more elaborated. Some papers I have read, they do many fermentation work, yeah, which come from research institution from Singapore, from China, and other Asian countries. They start to look at this fermentation of okara. So we here we need to do something good as well, but our local resources. I think that's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Kurnia Ramadan, for the presentation. And I will now briefly summarize the main points of the lecture. The first one is that animal products have been a major source of food protein for many people, and also innovations in providing alternative protein sources are promoted these days. Alternative protein food sources could come from plant-based protein foods, edible insects, microbial proteins, and also cultured meat. Plant-based have been an alternative to meat and dairy in Asian countries. And also the recent innovations on plant-based protein foods is like meat is a meat-like substance made from vegetarian ingredients called meat analog, which fully mimics the appearance, texture, flavor, and mouthfeel of meat products. And in Indonesia as well, we have a lot of potentials regarding the food alternatives like tempe, and also recently earlier Mr. Kurnia said ampas tahu, and also a lot of other potential resources in Indonesia. Okay, so next we have the Q&A session, and now we will start the Q&A session for the operator. Okay, thank you for sharing the screen. So the first question is from Anonymous. Can you give an example of how good food system is applied in several countries all over the world? Okay, I think this question is for Ms. Chileshe. So Ms. Chileshe, you are invited to answer this question.
Thanks. So I think this idea of good food, it's only something that people are starting to campaign on. So it's not something that countries have yet started to do or that we're seeing happen yet. But a good point to raise is that what we're trying to do, at least from the perspective of people that work in the space, is being able to challenge that good food means more than just one thing. I think a really key point that came out from the last presentation is being able to show this idea that I talked about of good food is not always a choice. So being able to say that a plant-based alternative in one place might not necessarily be the thing that works in another region. And the reason that this is important to be cognizant of the different contexts and what good food means in different contexts is that the solutions are going to be different in different places. And that's what a lot of campaigners are doing now. We yet to see there's some areas where you see countries starting to make advancements. So for instance, in Peru, when they did a massive campaigns around food demonstrations, you see that the patterns of consumption start to change. But it's really about towards this thing of, if we're saying it's about sustainability, it has to be more than just changes in the way that we're eating meats, but also thinking about the way that foods are produced and stored. So if, for instance, today we all stopped eating meat and all started eating plants, but those plants are still produced in the same way that are unsustainable to the environment, then we wouldn't have achieved much. So I think thinking about the solution in more of how do we challenge systems is the idea of good food. Yeah, I hope that was helpful in answering the question.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Shalisha. I believe that answers the question very well. And I think we can move on to another question. The second question from France GA. How in Africa is to sustain the food security in pandemics? Maybe, I think.
I'm happy to take that one as well.
Okay.
A thing we didn't speak about a lot is what COVID has done is that it's also increased the number of people facing hunger. So when I said 3 million more people are on the brink of starvation, that is very much also due to the pandemic and what it has caused. So in Africa particularly, we are seeing pockets, so East Africa, Southern Africa, and places like Madagascar, be very affected by sort of prolonged droughts. And we're seeing a lot of impact on their crops. And unfortunately, what COVID did is that it also cut off a lot of farmers from markets. So there are places where food was getting wasted because they couldn't get that food to be able to sell it. But also in urban areas now, we are not able to really access the foods that's coming from different places. So unfortunately, this has had quite a large impact. COVID, some of the secondary effects of the pandemic have not just been sort of on health, it has been on food security because of being cut off from markets, the lockdowns having quite a huge impact on rural and smallholder farmers. The big push is around sort of social services and food security. So there's been some packs. I have to say that in terms of how do we actually sustain the food security, the answer is more than one. In terms of what we are actually seeing, it's not a priority. The priority has not gone looking at the hunger crisis, and that's why we keep seeing the numbers increase. And this is not just in Africa, we are seeing this play out in a lot of places. So the pandemic has made it worse. Hunger crisis is rising, but unfortunately it's not a priority that we're seeing governments or private sector respond to. And it's almost like the responsibility has been left on UN agencies like the World Food Programme to bring in meals as opposed to a collective approach. So this is part of the work that I do at Global Citizen to make sure that we keep making sure that it stays in the headline, that people keep talking about it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Shilashaya. I believe it's very sad that the world is not it is not getting attention in the world about the food security. And also we will now move on to the next question. Among the 4 general categories of alternative protein food sources, which is the most sustainable way? Okay, I believe this question is for Mr. Ramadan. And I would like to know from Mr. Ramadan to answer his question.
Okay. From the 4 categories that I have mentioned in my presentation, in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, all of them are considered as very low. Yeah. So from that point of view, it fulfill the requirement. But then it has some weaknesses on some categories like cultured meat. It is still very high cost. Yeah, it's very costly since it is still on the research stage, not ready for the wide or the mass production. And also it's related to the regulation because it is meat that not comes from the animal. So the regulation anywhere in the world has not been addressing this as something legal. So it will limited by the legal aspects. Yeah. And then also for the insects, yeah, the edible insects, it has problem with the acceptance among the consumers. Yeah. So bad perception about insect is still well known, yeah, on the consumers in general. I think there's two, yeah, the microbial protein and the plant-based is quite have a good reputation. So I think there's two categories are more ready for the wide application. I hope that's answering the question.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Ramadan, for answering the question. I hope that answers question from Anonymous about the categories of alternative food sources. And we'll now move on to the next question from France GA again. Okay, so quick question for Mr. Kurnia. What do you think about the food estate which built by the Indonesian government? Do you think that program can sustain our food security?
Okay, it's quite complicated, yeah, to respond to the policy of government, but I appreciate the government in terms of their intention, yeah, to solve about the food problems, yeah, in Indonesia. But from my point of view, the centralization, yeah, the central production of foods is not suitable with the concept of the sustainability, yeah, and usually the campaign on food sustainability is about the local distribution, yeah. So there are local production within the area rather than creating a mass production at the central location. But this might have other consideration as well. But I believe the government have think about it. Yeah, so I'm not giving more comments on this, I think.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ramadan, for answering the question. Maybe we can also move on to the next question for Ms. Chilashay. Can the food companies be blamed for increasing the risk of death because of the food production of junk food which is consumed by a lot of people?
This is a fairly tricky question. I smiled when I saw it because it's the big thing, which I also alluded to, is the way that food is produced now and processed. A lot of that is driven by profits and big companies. So which is the point I was trying to make, that even if we move to plant-based alternatives and then continue to be driven by profits, we'll still see a system where there's a lot of waste that happens, but there's also a lot of production that is driven by just profit and not the end consumer. So in this case, it can't be denied the kind of role that large companies have played in the way that it's cheaper to buy 2 liters of a soda than it is to be able to buy like 3-4 apples. So thinking about that is there is a large driver for what is happening in the way that our diets are shaped. Another key thing that has happened, I think, in over a number of years. So I grew up in a relatively small town. I'm currently based in Zambia, and I grew up in a relatively small town here. You would go to a market, or you would go into individual sort of people who are selling things, but now you walk into a place and it's a supermarket. And the first thing, and always the things that you see first, are the products that are advertised to sort of capture your attention. And those products are normally not the healthy options. And this one is not just about plant-based alternative and red meats, it's also like high salt, high fats, and high sugar. So there's a large part that big agriculture and big companies have played in shaping our diets, both in the ways that are unsustainable to our health, but also unsustainable to the environment.
Okay, thank you so much, Ms. Chileche, for answering the question. Yeah, I think it's also said that a lot of uh, brands, famous brands in the world that focuses on the profit, not on the on consumers, and also the benefits to our health. Okay, so I think we also have another question for Mr. Kurnia. Plant-based proteins food that produce with derivative product, what kind of aids to help farmers planted on that items?
Uh, Apologies, I don't really get this question about what kind of aids, but from my understanding, the one of example that usually can do is like partnership between the company, yeah, the manufacturer producer with the growers, yeah, with the farmers. So it used to be practice, yeah, like in the cocoa planters, yeah, farmers and other like coffee farmers. They have partnership with the buyers or the manufacturers. So the farmers are being educated, and then to get the good quality of products they can sell to their buyers. So I think I hope that's answered that question. Some kind of partnership.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Kurnia. I think that quite answered the question. And also we have a question for Ms. Chileche again. Hi, Ms. Chileche, do you think plant-based alternatives is an accessible choice for people? If not now, maybe in the future?
Yeah, and I think that this point has come up quite consistently. It's more expensive to access a healthier diet. But also, something that Mr. Kenya raised in his presentation is the way in which, when we consume sort of plant-based diets, you almost have to take other supplements to be able to also get proteins that you need to access from other foods. And so if you think about communities where they already don't have money to access plant-based diets, a shift to those diets means that they might end up having micronutrient deficiencies, which they also then can't support with other alternatives that might be more expensive. So I think accessibility is not just from the food itself, but also if there's any gaps in their diets or micronutrient deficiencies, how are they able to cover that up? That's also inaccessible for them. The other part is around this idea of pricing, and it's the cheaper foods are usually not outside of just the meat. It's also the high sugar and high fat that I talked about. That is also much cheaper for most people. So I think that the inaccessibility is in a kind of a multiple places that it shows up. But that's sort of the answer. I think in the future, there's certainly ways around thinking about local context. This came up a lot in the presentation that Mr. Kenya raised around thinking about what is most sustainable for that region, what is the local context, and how does that shape the diets of the people there. I think that's what we need to look to in the future. And I think it's actually quite a big challenge. Well, we came into this discussion with a question, and plant-based alternatives the answer, but I think it's a question that we need to keep continuing. It's a challenge actually for this group, sort of some of the research that you take on the data that is still needed to build out the arguments for this, that we still need to keep asking this question even beyond this lecture.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Chileche. Yeah, I think plant-based alternative is still some people think plant-based alternatives is not very accessible to them, so they are not very aware about the plant-based alternatives and also the benefits to themselves. Okay, so the next question is from Tetuko. How about mushroom-based foods as alternatives of meat analog foods, as tropical countries have wide variety of fungus and mushrooms? Okay. I think this is for Mr. Kurnia, right?
Let me answer. So yeah, it's definitely true that our country has a tropical climate, yeah, which is very good for the growth or the microbes, yeah, such as fungus and mushrooms. And this topic has been researched extensively, but then has not met I think has not met the requirement for the scaling up yet, but I think it still have a good projection, good potential, because like I said, uh, looking at the corn, like I described earlier, corn is from the Fusarium venenatum, which has the strand-like shapes, So tempeh itself, have a similar shapes, I think, which have modify using appropriate technology to develop into something similar to corn, I think. But we have not been there yet. We need more effort and research to do to make it more perfect. I think that's what we need to do.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ramadan, for answering the question. I think I can conclude that there will be an potential for mushrooms as an alternative for meat analog food in the future. Okay, so I think the next question will be our last questions to the time restriction. So the last question is, tempeh is an affordable food. So how can we produce it on an industrial scale so it can also be exported to all around the world, especially to underdeveloped countries?
Okay,
I think
let me answer this question. Tempeh is affordable here in Indonesia, but not in Europe and America. If you check the price of tempeh in Europe and America, North America, it's far more expensive than chicken, I think. So it's quite luxury there. Also in Japan, I think. But here in Indonesia, we have very we have to be grateful. So we can have tempeh with very low cost. Very cheap. In terms of industrial scale, there are some companies trying to do somehow like industrial version of tempeh, so they make it more hygiene, more what we call more proper industrial production. But then the scale is not has not meet the demand of tempeh in Indonesia, because the tempeh producer in Indonesia usually come from the what we call the small enterprises, the small industrial enterprises. In terms of exporting to the other countries, we need to find appropriate technology to extend its shelf life, because tempeh is a fermented product and it's sold as a fresh product. So the fungus, the rhizopus is still growing when you buy tempeh. It's still live. The raw tempeh is that we buy from the market, from the shop, is living things. So without technology that we can control it, we cannot transport them into wider a place. So we need appropriate technology to do that, and also I think that's the answer.
If I can just add to the bit around the industrial scale, I think part of the point we've been trying, at least I've been trying to make, is that when you try and industrialize and introduce big agriculture to some ideas that are smallholder farmers are good at producing, you actually might be causing more damage to a food system, because what you then do now is create more footprint for producing tempeh than it's done before. And trying to export it, you now introduce a food to a community that's not indigenous to them. So it's also might not be culturally appropriate. So it's about how do you support the people that are already producing tempeh in the region to be able to produce it well, to store it well, and people can continue to access it affordably, and that it doesn't get taken over by profit-driven production.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Ramadan, and also Ms. Chalisha, for your perspective on tempeh. And I think we still have time. We still can fit the time for one more last question. Do plant-based alternatives for sustainable food security have an impact on survival over the next 5 years? And I think both of you can answer this question, this last question.
I'm not sure I fully understand it, but I think that we are not yet at the scale where we have plant-based alternatives already widespread to be able to make a judgment on the kind of impact. Perhaps there's some research that has already been done that I'm not aware of on the impact it will have on the footprint of GHG emissions, but on food security particularly. A lot of the foods that people access in emergency situations tends to be cereal-based. And so that is important in terms of being able to address emergencies. But in terms of what that looks like for food security, I think that the evidence around that continues to develop, and I'm actually quite interested to hear what Mr. Knia has to say on this question.
Okay, Mr. Ramadan, you are now welcome to also answer this question.
Impact on survival over the next 5 years. I believe that plant-based is just one option, not a single path to achieve the sustainability in food system. So we need a more harmonic strategy for this achieve the sustainable food security, and not only rely on the plant-based alternative, but also the sustainable practice on the livestock production as well. I think that's all.
Okay. Thank you so much, Mr. Ramadan, and also Ms. Chelache for answering the last question. So this last question actually closes our Q&A session. And once again, I would like to say thank you for Mr. Ramadan and Ms. Chelache for answering the questions from the participants in this Q&A session. Moving on, I want to remind to all the participants to fill out the QC form that will be given to you from the chat box, and also the attendance form. I would like to remind you that these two links are different, so you must fill in the two links, the one for the attendance and one also for the QC or the quality control. Okay, so I also want to remind that the participants will get the certificates, and you will only get the certificates if you filled the QC form. Lastly, we also have a small token of appreciation from for our speakers today, and I would like to invite Kak Afina Zamara as the representative of SPEYSC to present the token of appreciation. And also to Ms. Mandi Chelache and Mr. Kurnia, I think you can take the picture now for the operator.
Okay, for the photo session, I will count from 3 to 1. Okay, 3, 2, 1. Okay, thank you.
Okay, for the next speaker, Mr. Kurnia Ramadan.
Okay, I will count from 3 to 1. 3, 2, 1. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Chelache and Mr. Kurnia Ramadan for the amazing session. And I truly hope that all the participants enjoyed and gained some insight regarding food security. Thank you to you both.
Okay. So now I would like to also invite all of the participants to turn on your cameras because we will have a photo session with all the participants. We will wait for 1 minute for you to open your cameras. Okay, so 1 minute have passed, and for the operator, you can now take the screenshot.
Okay, so again, let me count from 3 to 1 for a photo session. Okay, I will count from 3 to 1 now. 3, 2, 1. Okay, for the second slide. 3, 2, 1. Okay, thank you.
Thank you for the operator. Now that we have come to the end of this event, on behalf of SBEUISC, I would like to give my biggest thanks to our speakers today, to Ms. Monde Chileshe and also Mr. Kurnia Ramadan. It was a pleasure to have you guys with us, and thank you for giving us such a valuable knowledge regarding plant-based alternatives and sustainable food security. I also thank all the participants for making time to join us and actively participating during the event. We look forward to seeing you at next year's event. Goodbye and have a nice day.
Bye, thank you.
Goodbye. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you for all.
Society for Biological
Thank you,
Engineering
everyone.
is a global organization of leading engineers and scientists dedicated to advancing the integration of biology and engineering. This year, SBEUISC aims to foster a professional community that allows stakeholders to creatively thrive in a nurturing environment so that they can utilize their engineering skills in alleviating global issues. Our mission is to promote the integration of biology with engineering and realize its benefits through bioprocessing, biomedical, and biomolecular applications. So, what are the benefits of being a member? Well, by being a member, you'll get first-hand access to IKEA journals and webinars, professional exposure and networking, and effective ideas implementation. For this year's core values, we abbreviated it into ALLIES. It stands for accountability, leadership, liaison, impact, empathy, and synergy. We have two themes for this year. They are pharmaceutical science and food technology, and we aim to give our members the greatest benefit possible. With fresh ideas and various innovations, we are ready to begin a new adventure with you towards a synchronized growth. So, what are you waiting for? Follow our social media and our website at sbuisc.com to synchronize with us.